topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Alise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program, which has been brought to you with passion and pride since February of 2015. Thanks for tuning in again this week. Great to have you. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. If we have not met before and you don't know me, I'm an organizational psychologist and logotherapist, speaker, and author. My team and I at Gusto Now help companies to enliven and fortify their operations by building a dynamic, high-performance culture and inspirational leadership activated by meaning and purpose. And did you know that inspired employees outperform their satisfied peers by a factor of 2.25 to 1? So in other words, inspiration is good for the bottom line. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at gusto-now.com and my personal site, alisecortez.com. Into today's program, we have with us today Janet Ioli, who is an executive advisor, leadership coach, speaker, and career strategist for women leaders at Power Presence Academy, and the author of Less Ego, More Soul, which we'll be talking about today. She joins us today from Newport Beach, California. Janet, welcome to Working on Purpose.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I so admire you and your show, so I'm excited to be here.
Oh, thank you, Janet. And I loved your book. I absolutely love this. Less ego, more soul, please. Stat, right? I mean, of course, as you know, I read my guest books cover to cover. And sometimes I embarrass myself in public when I'm reading them because I'm saying, I'm like, yes, that's right. Yes, that's me. So that's what you've done for me as well, Janet. You've embarrassed me in public, and that's okay.
That's always a good thing. If you're reading it aloud and laughing or having that moment, that's great.
Right. So oftentimes I'm reading at the gym and people will come over and they're like, that must be a good book because you are into it as you're pedaling over here. Yes, you should read it too. Well, let's start with you. One of the things that I really appreciate about you and your background, and having lived in Spain and Brazil myself in my 20s, is your own background. Growing up as a child in Athens, Greece, you have a Greek mother and an American father. It's just pretty interesting the way that you were formed and raised. If you could just speak a little bit about your upbringing, how that's really punctuated the work that you do today.
Yeah, I think it's funny how our origin stories form who we are, right? Like you said, I grew up in Greece. And at the time, it's funny, my father was in the military and my mom is Greek. And I always felt like I was not normal. And what I mean by that is that, so every time I was with people who were Greek or who were from my mom's side, they would consider me American. And every time I was with people who were American, they would consider me, oh, she's Greek. So it was this sense of not fitting in, even though it was such an incredible experience having both worlds. At the time, I didn't really realize how powerful that is to be able to be exposed to these two different worlds and try to navigate them. And so through the process of navigating those two worlds, I think I developed a keen sense of observation and listening and watching. It's like, okay, what are they doing? And what are they doing? And then I realized, wait a minute, there's not one way to do anything in the world. And that really shaped me, I think, and it shaped my work today, and it shapes who I am, is that I'm very curious because I think we get conditioned to think that there's only one way to do something, or there's only one way to be, or whatever it is we're learning. And yet, in fact, that's our own story that we're being created by how we're brought up.
It's so beautiful. And I think too, you had, you suffered from, I forget exactly what it was, something to do with your eye.
Oh, that's a whole other, yeah. So let me tell that story. So this even, I didn't want to tell you my whole life story, but this really, really impacted me is that, growing up in Greece, it was really interesting because my father's American and he's from the South and from Tennessee. So I had very light skin, very, I have green eyes, blonde hair. And it has a little help now, but it was always kind of blonde at the time. And I would walk around and people would notice me and they would say, "Oh, what a cute little girl." And "Oh, how cute." And "Oh my gosh, what an adorable little girl." And they'd pinch your cheek and all of that stuff. And then in the second grade, I developed what is known as, and it's pretty common, I'm sure many of you listening have heard of this, is what's called a lazy eye, where one of my eyes started to cross and it would go all the way in. And so to me, I couldn't tell that was happening unless I looked in the mirror. It didn't affect my eyesight, but oh my goodness, did that impact my whole world. I went from being seen as this, oh, cute little girl to this person who was a freak, who was, I would get taunts from kids saying, she's this cross-eyed lion. They would push me. People at school wouldn't play with me anymore. I mean, it was it was incredibly traumatic. And for anybody who has been different or had any type of difference, I'm sure can resonate. I mean, I don't even know, what an impact something like that can have on you. And I remember crying every single day, wishing I could be normal, if I could be normal. And lo and behold, wonders of surgery, right? I had eye surgery in third grade and they fixed the eye and there I was back to normal. And there I was again, this cute little girl that everybody wanted to play with. But what had happened is something inside of me had really changed.
Yep.
And what had changed was I was just different because I realized I had not changed. Nothing inside of me had changed. It was the eye. And I started to realize that we place way too much value on the outside. And I think that really started my journey inward and my focus on the inner part of ourselves versus the outer part of ourselves, because that wasn't any different.
That's totally what I got from that. And that's why I wanted you to share that story. Yeah. And here we are, you and I both, you mentioned in your book, and I completely agree, that many people are very accustomed to living what you call being on the surface rather than going deep. And I have seen that as well. And for much of my life, I was always, if you're not going to share your soul with me, don't waste my time, which caused a lot of people to flee, as you can imagine. Right. But that's where I wanted to be.
Well, because it's scary. Right? That's a scary place to be, is on the inside, because when we go inside, we have to face some of the things that we don't like to face. And I think that's really the impetus that had me write the book, is, some of my own experiences, not facing the parts of me that had become something that I had not created, or that weren't even part of me. And, recalling some of these things and going inward really made me get more attuned to who I was and who I am.
Yes. And so much of the reason I wanted to have you on my podcast, Janet, is as both you and I work with leaders and are out to develop and transform leaders. So to be able to really get in touch with that inner wise person that you talk about in your book requires to be able to go in. And yet both you and I know, and you wrote about this beautifully in your book, that we are governed a lot by the society we live in. We are very much thrown to following the rules of that culture and what are all those shoulds that we're supposed to be, and what that we overlook the beautiful person inside of us that's screaming for our attention.
Yeah.
And to be expressed authentically.
And this is, I think it's the journey of unraveling that, right? And that's part of that inner work that I see so often. It's funny when you talk about leadership, and I'm sure you see this in your work. We get to a certain point that what worked for us in the past doesn't work for us anymore. And at that point, we have to come to terms with, okay, what is it that we've been doing? And most of the time, what I find is that we've been reacting. We've been conditioned to try to please, prove, protect ourselves, right? For safety and security, and also to achieve more. And then there's a point where I hear, and you probably see this in your work as well, I hear stories. I'll be talking to leaders in organizations who have reached the pinnacle of success, and they'll say, I'm not fulfilled. Yeah. I feel like I'm putting on an act, like I'm wearing a mask, or, this isn't me. I don't know who I am. Or you hear all of these types of stories. And I think that is indicative of not only how we're conditioned, but also how we choose to live a little bit unconsciously, because we're not even aware of it. We just go through the motions. We go through the motions. And not in a bad way, right?
Right. And so what I would say to that's just been so great along my own journey, Janet, of, cultivating myself, is recognizing the power of really paying attention to owning, stewarding, and being in your emotions to be able to really understand how you really feel. So what I discovered for myself is, and I used to say this about 12 years ago, I really stepped well on this path of when I recognized I'm going to go straight down this, this path of researching meaning and work and identity, which led me to purpose, etc.
Right.
And the moment I did that, Janet, the moment what I like to say, that quiet whisper that you talk about in your book, I heard it, except it was a scream. and it was like, go this way. And I always like to talk about it as, it was like closing my eyes and being so still that I could hear, where was I supposed to put my next foot on the lily pad? And I put it on that next lily pad. And it was such a right path for me. And the overwhelming joy that I felt by that was my guide. And that's when I knew I was on the right path. And so what I've come to is, the more that we can pay attention to these beautiful lifting emotions, and we know we're on the right path, if our next decision or whatever is taking us down or making us feel bad, it's probably not right for us. But here's the trick, and I know you know this, we have to learn how to tap into that wisdom within ourselves to be able to know that we actually feel that way first.
Exactly. And here's what my reaction to when you were talking. The first thing I would say is when you said you had to be still. How many of us can be still? How many of us want to be still? How many of us know how to be still? Yeah. I mean, that's the other piece of it. It's interesting. I remember when I first took yoga years ago, and I went to a yoga class and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't just sit here. I mean, that's pretty embarrassing to admit. But I hear that all the time from so many of my clients. It's like, oh, I can't sit still. I have to be doing something. And I think we're so used to doing that it's hard for us to be aware of who we're being. And I know that sounds a little woo-woo on some level, but it really is profound if in fact we are looking for meaning and purpose in our work, at home, in our lives. I mean, it's learning to be still and really going inward and finding that place inside of ourselves that already has the answers we're looking for.
Yeah.
If we just pause to listen. And like you said, the whispers become shouts, and sometimes they're shouting and we just drown it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What are all the things we drown it out with, right? It's either more achievements, status, buying material things. That's a way that we drown it out. Another way we drown it out is alcohol. I mean, food. I mean, we can go on and on and on. I don't have to tell you that, but that is I think if there's something that I wanted to communicate is learning how to do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another way of saying drowning out is numbing, right? We numb ourselves,
Exactly.
And that's why the opportunity is to wake up, awaken again. And when I'm out speaking to audiences, and usually by about 9 minutes in, I will then usually ask the question to the audience, "What are you passionate about?" And as soon as I pose that question, I then immediately dial in to the audience even further. And I realize that about 85 to 90% of them realize in that one moment they do not have an answer to the question.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
Right. And it's because, I'm not judging anything because I've been on that same train, but they've lost touch with, what is it that they're passionate about. So they don't really know what is it that really turns them on, that they really want to give themselves over to. And I've had people hire me to speak at conferences because they said, Alise, I was the person in the crowd that didn't have the answer. And I want you to give that same message to these people that I now am helping to steward. So that's the hamster wheel you were talking about, right? If you're so busy on the hamster wheel, you can't necessarily know what you're passionate about.
And not only what are you passionate about, but who you are. And,
right.
And seriously, I mean, oftentimes I'll ask someone, so who are you? And what's important to you? Or what do you believe in? And there's a blank look. It's like, I really don't know the answer to that question because I haven't had a chance. And how can you really find your meaning and purpose and your passion in the world if you haven't done the inner work to sit there and think about who you are, what's important, what do you believe in, and what are you? And I always say, and that's why, I ask people to create a personal manifesto, saying, who are you? What do you believe in? And what are you committed to?
Mm-hmm.
And not what others have told you that you're committed to you or have told you to believe in, but what do you believe in? And those are hard questions. They sound so simple.
Yeah. When I meet people for the first time and living here in Dallas, there's a significant percentage of population that I learned a long time ago that don't necessarily work outside the home. So I stopped saying, what do you do, a long time ago, partly for that reason. So when I meet new people, what I generally will say, hi, what's your name? What do you pour yourself into? And they will almost always ask me, what do you mean? Like, what do I do? Yeah. What do they mean? Do you mean what I do for work or what? I'm like, whatever's significant to you, what do you pour yourself into that lights you up?
Yeah.
That will tell me a lot about that person. That's a fun conversation.
Yeah. And there's the passion, right? There's the passion what do you pour yourself? I heard somebody once say, at least they said, what can you not help yourself from doing?
Yes. I also asked that question. What can you not do? Yes.
Right? Like even if it's organizing or putting, giving people directions or whatever it is, if you can't help yourself from doing it, that's something obviously that you'd be passionate about.
And here's what's great. And then I want to take us to break. What's great about that is when you get people talking about that, what immediately happens, and you know this, Janet, is you see that person's energy immediately rise.
Wow.
And now they're possibly infecting whoever it is in the vicinity. And that's what we want.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Let's grab our first break. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. We went on the air with Janet Ioli, who is an executive advisor, leadership coach, speaker, and career strategist for women leaders at Power Presence Academy. We've been talking a bit about her work and her book, Less Ego, More Soul. After the break, what we want to do is really situate with you the power and importance and role of what she calls thunderbolts in life. We'll be right back.
Dr. Alise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Alise to speak to your organization, please visit her at alisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Alise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Alise, send an email to Alise, A-L-I-S-E, at alisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. As I'm dedicated to helping create a world where people realize their potential at work and are led by inspirational leaders that help them find and contribute their greatness, and we do business that betters the world, I continue to research and write my own books. So my last one came out in March of 2023. It's called The Great Revitalization: How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. And I wrote it to help leaders understand the needs and wants of today's very discerning workforce. And then I offer 22 best practices to help you equip your organization, your culture, to create that for them. You can find my books on Amazon or my websites, alisecortez.com or gusto-now.com. If you are just now joining us, my guest is Janet Ioli. She's the author of Less Ego, More Soul. So Thunderbolts was really an interesting idea for me. And of course, I could relate to that. And as I was reading that part of your book, I'm like, oh yeah, I got a couple of those that I can remember. So let's talk about first, how do you define Thunderbolts? What are they?
Yeah. So let me start with what causes a thunderbolt, and then I'll define that. So as we go along, I think as I was working with many clients, they would talk to me about wanting to change. I want to change something. I'm not really fulfilled, but I don't know exactly what that is. And kind of like what you were saying, it's not so much even the passion. It was like, I don't really know why I'm not fulfilled.
Yeah.
But yet they were going along on their path of continuing, climbing the career ladder or doing all the things that they were doing at home, at work, whatever, but not really going inside and thinking about it. And then something would happen in their life. And what I call a thunderbolt is when something hits you that's unexpected and it just knocks you out. Mm-hmm. For example, I mean, and I have, and I'll share a couple of mine as well, and I know you have them as well. It could be a divorce. It could be an illness. It could be a death of a family member. It could be the loss of a job. I mean, and go on and on. Something that just blindsides you and you're not expecting it, and it knocks you off that little path that you've been on. And then what it does, it's so severe, and that's why it's a thunderbolt. It brings you to your knees. I mean, you're at your knees at mercy saying, oh my gosh, now what? Everything that I believe to be true is no longer true. I know that happened with me when my dad was diagnosed with lung cancer at 8. He was 59 years old, and I was in my 30s at the time. And he was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. Never been sick a day in his life. And that was not, I'm sure it's a thunderbolt for him, but it was a thunderbolt for me because it started to make me think about, whoa, life is short. Mm-hmm. If he can be diagnosed, I mean, he just was retiring. He was retiring early so that he could do all the things he wanted to do in his life. And hold on, now he's diagnosed with terminal lung cancer and he's supposed to die in 6 months. Whoa. So that just cracked open something for me. And in this way that I can't even describe. It was electric. And that's where the thunderbolt comes in. And the cracking open was, wow, this is not a continuous journey. There's an end somewhere and we don't know where that is. And, I had remembered my conversations with him saying, how much he wanted to be an attorney and how he always wanted to be a lawyer, and that, he could even go back to school at 59, blah, blah, blah. And there it was. So it just opened up this portal for me of, wow, why am I here? Who am I? And what am I doing? And what do I want to do with the rest of my life? And I don't think that's a very uncommon experience. I've heard that people share these things with me about their having a divorce, about, and I know you and I were talking about that before we started, right? I mean, I would assume that anyone who's gone through anything like that can resonate with what a thunderbolt is.
Yeah, and what I think is important about this, why I think I think both of us really, so revel in our work, is what do you do with these thunderbolts? There's how do you respond to these things? Do you just cower over and go into the fetal position? That's great for a while, but how do we respond? And I know what I really discovered. I mean, this is careful what you ask for in life, Janet. When I was in my 40s, I used to say, I probably won't amount to very much in life because I really haven't been through very much. Life hasn't catalyzed me into much. I've got a nice life. I'm good. I like the work that I'm doing, but hey. But the two thunderbolts that really helped a lot were when I got divorced. It wasn't my idea, but it was a really good idea. But it hurt like a son of a gun, and it came. For me, I shouldn't have been blindsided, but I was, and it really, really caused me to, or allowed me, because of the catalyzing force of it, to really go deep into my soul and, excavate its contents and to go looking in there around the murky, corners to see what was there. And I found some pretty, scary stuff in there. And, as I was digging around. But I'll tell you that deep search for, understanding and, all of the working through all of the really intense emotions, there's no way, Janet, that I would be living my purpose today if I had not gone through that process. No way. Now, I am not saying that I'm going to go write my ex-husband, a thank you note here. I'm not saying that. But I will recognize that, and that's what I want to reinforce for our listeners and viewers, is what are you getting from your thunderbolts? And maybe you need help, moving through those thunderbolts to be able to see what's the beauty and the growth and how you have emerged on the other side of coming through that.
And what I say in my book is that it's sad that we wait for thunderbolts to happen in order to make the changes we need to make.
Yes.
And we know, I think there's a whisper, and then sometimes it's a shout inside of us when something isn't quite right. If we take the time to listen, that, I'm not really resonating with what I'm doing, or there's something not right in whatever it is, right? Whether it's my health, something. We get little messages and we don't pay attention to them because we're so busy. We're so drowned in this go, go, go. And that's why I talk about the importance of having some type of a ritual where you're checking in with that inner part of yourself. It's interesting. I had a guest on my podcast, 2 guests on my podcast in the last season, and they were psychologists, and they said, both of them said the same thing. And then I did a fact check to say, is that true? Really? 95% of what we do is unconscious.
Yeah, I've heard that stat before as well.
Yeah. And 95%. I mean, that is staggering to me. And so if in fact that is true, then there's so much that's going on that we're not even paying attention to.
Yeah, absolutely.
So part of it is learning to pay attention, stop going through the motions, which is really most of our life. 95% of our life is going through the motions. And so stop going through the motions and start bringing more of that unconscious into our conscious awareness and become more conscious about it.
Yes.
I think that is the beauty of Thunderbolts, because it forces us to do that, because it opens up this portal that, it's pain, a pain portal that causes us to, surrender that to that unconscious. But what we can also do that without waiting for a thunderbolt, and we don't have to be at their mercy. And I think that's really a key point here.
Mm-hmm. It is. And, the other major thunderbolt that happened for me, at least so far, is both of my parents passed 28 days apart in January of 2019. And that just really, I wasn't expecting it. My mother she was 73 years old. She was so smart and so strong. And she just had given up the will to live. And as a logotherapist, I understand that. That's what happens. But my dad largely followed her out with a broken heart 28 days later. And so suddenly I'm the top of the mountain. I'm the oldest child. And I'm like, okay. And this whole idea of I'll get to it someday, suddenly that was gone. There's no, perhaps not someday. And it gave me a fire, Janet. And that is really where, that was 2019. I got my first book out and the next year, 2020. And then I resolved I would write 1 book a year for 10 years. And so far I'm on track to do that. But part of that came from the recognition, the thunderbolt of, what, I don't have, maybe when I get to it kind of thing. And Dan Pink, his book on when also taught me a lot about time and how halftime can be a really catalyzing force for a lot of people. And listeners and viewers, I want you to think about that. If you think you're halftime, when I got into my 50s, I went, man, I'm at halftime and I feel like I'm behind. Right. And that motivation is strong when you start to get recognition. So what I love about what we're talking about here, Janet, is we're talking about how can we access and put in motion these catalyzing forces to evolve and transform and become more of who we really are without the need of thunderbolts or some of these other major life impacts.
Yeah. And it's interesting, the stories that we tell ourselves to avoid it, because I do think we avoid this. I think we avoid going in because it's hard. It's hard to sit there and figure out, okay, what do I do with the rest of my life? Or am I happy? Am I fulfilled? Does my life have meaning? And going back to your thing, does it have purpose and passion? I mean, all of those questions we avoid because we just keep going and going and going. And I think what you just said was so powerful, is that a lot of those things are excuses, because if we have to wait for the thunderbolt, that thunderbolt may come pretty later on in that halftime. It may come in the 4th quarter, right? And so wherever that is, we shouldn't be waiting for that. We should be taking those steps right now to start to think about, okay, am I living in alignment with who I want to become?
Mm-hmm. Which is, I think, why both you and I love the work that we do, is helping people to be able to do just that. It's, in many ways, this is what I think is so amazing, right? It is, I know in my own path, one path to purpose is what's ailed you in your life, that in the wrestling of that you've learned something that you can help others with in the same fashion. And maybe some of that was also your path. But that was mine. That's, wrestling with meaning and purpose in my mid-20s, et cetera. And now today, helping more people to be able to discover that unique, authentic path to themselves, to their soul, so they can live from that place, is really a lot of the work that I do too. I do it as for individuals in leaders and organizations, as well as for the organization itself. What's the soul of the organization? What's the purpose of the organization? And it's such beautiful work to be able to watch someone's molecules change right in front of your eyes as they discover this for themselves. Yeah?
Yeah. So Amen. I so agree with that. And when we talk about the word soul, I think sometimes people get scared off by that.
Mhm.
Or it's like, okay, is that a religious thing, or what exactly are we talking about?
Yeah.
So when I talk about the word soul, I'm talking about a deep place inside of ourselves that is that's universal. It's connected to everything else. And we know that energy is connected, that we're all energy. And there is a place where we have connection with everybody else. And often we don't connect with people in that place. We connect with them on the surface, or from a place of fear, from a place of survival. The things we talked about before is, how do I protect myself? How do I please? We're not connecting on this pure level that really brings us meaning. And what we start to see is that because we crave that, look at what happens in workplaces when we don't connect with that. Look at what happens in society. I mean, look at what's happening right now in our society. So I think when we're talking about soul, we're not talking about some ethereal thing. We're just talking about this human experience that we all have that is deep inside of us that we can connect to.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I completely agree with that. And therefore, it's something that is for everyone, isn't just something that maybe you want to opt into. But for me, Janet, I mean, I'm very, very interested in this field. I had Richard Barrett on my podcast a few weeks ago, and the man is all about soul. He has a book that's called What My Soul Told Me. What he really puts forth is we don't have a soul. We are a soul.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And so I think, again, if you look at today, the Surgeon General has put out that loneliness is an epidemic, and it's wreaking all kinds of havoc in our society. And loneliness is so bad for our health that it's the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So if we can, this is why I think your work is important, why my work is important. We're helping people to more meaningfully connect with themselves and each other. Now we start to eradicate this loneliness problem.
Right. And think about when you say loneliness, it's interesting. And people hate this question, by the way, but on the Gallup survey, employee engagement surveys at work, one of the questions is, do you have a best friend at work? Now, they're not asking you whether you have friends at work. They're asking you whether you feel connected at work. That's really what they're asking you when they ask you that question, because people hate that question. But really what we're talking about is that loneliness. Do you have a connection at work, even at work? And so this is not a topic just, for outside of work. It's a topic that really impacts our work lives and also leadership. So, I mean, I think that's such an important point you make.
Well, we are kindred souls, my friend. And on that note, let's grab our last break and let our listeners and viewers kind of stew on what we've been sharing so far. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. We've been on air with Janet Ioli, who is an executive advisor, leadership coach, speaker, and career strategist for women leaders at Power Presence Academy. We've been having a very delicious conversation about thunderbolts and other things that awaken us in life. We'll be right back.
Dr. Alise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Alise to speak to your organization, please visit her at alisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Alise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Alise, send an email to Alise, A-L-I-S-E, at alisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. I mentioned in the last break that my latest book came out, The Great Revitalization. What I did for you is I created a very simple 3-page assessment you can pull off my website, gusto-now.com, and that will help you understand the extent to which your organization's culture is really living in the principles that are what today's discerning workforce really wants. It will help you really guide what you need to do next. If you are just joining me, my guest is Janet Ioli. She's the author of Less Ego, More Soul. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the gifts of thunderbolts. What they give us. I think we've been sort of talking a little bit about that in each of our stories, but I think it's helpful because I know there's also the segment of society where that like, how come this had to happen to me? And gosh, we can fall into a sort of a victim mode instead of really embracing our agency and our as of course Viktor Frankl taught us, is we have a choice between stimulus and response, and that is our attitude. So can you talk a little bit, Janet, from your perspective and experience about some of the gifts of thunderbolts?
Well, at the moment, they don't feel like gifts. That's for sure, right?
darn straight. Yeah,
it's like, well, exactly.
Yeah.
And it is, why is this happening to me? I think it's only in hindsight that we can look back and say, well, like you said about your divorce, I'm sure that in that moment, that did not feel like a gift to you.
No.
I mean, it tore your whole world apart, I'm sure.
It did, yeah.
Right. And so anytime we've experienced anything like that, it doesn't feel like a gift. I'll tell you I'll give you an example of this one. And it's a very personal example, but I have a stepdaughter who is 24 years old, and I've known her since she was 5, right? And when she was 20, in her second year of college, she developed thyroid cancer, and had to have her thyroid removed. And she also, I'm tearing up as I talk about this, but she also had, to take out lymph nodes. It was pretty progressed. We never had really noticed that there was this big lump on her throat. It was amazing. And so anyway, so she, is in remission. It went, everything is fine now. But she said, getting that at an early age, and she's studied to become a therapist, and she's in her first job now at her age, being a therapist, because she wanted to help people. But she said getting that at her age, she said, was a blessing and a gift, which is hard to believe, right? And she said the reason that was a blessing and a gift is because she lives her life in a different way than her peers, because she realizes the delicacy and the fragility of it, but also realizes that life just goes by, and you either have something to offer or something to do in this life or not. And so she just has this sense of urgency, Alise, that I've never seen. And she'll talk about it as that was a gift. If I hadn't, I wouldn't have seen things the way I see them. And she is so mature. I mean, compared to what she was before, she's a typical person growing up, right? I can't believe, I feel like I'm living with a wise woman, right? When I see her. And so what I think that is one of the gifts, is that it really wizened her. And I think that can happen to all of us, is that we become wiser. We learn so much from a thunderbolt. I know from my thunderbolt, I learned that the same thing, with my father, is the urgency, the sense of urgency, kind of what you were saying, is that, my gosh, I don't have this unlimited time. And so what am I going to do, as, Mary Oliver says, with this one precious life I have, and not only what am I going to do, but who am I going to be and how am I going to serve? So it really helps in that way. And, we're not trying to be morbid here, I think. We're not saying, all these bad things can happen. But when these things happen to us, I'll give you another example. I have my best friend from high school. Her daughter would have been the same age as my stepdaughter now. And she died when she was 10 and a half. And she just died on the playground. She had a heart attack on the playground.
At age 10?
10.
Oh
She did have a pacemaker from birth, right? But she was fine. I mean, like, it was not at all expected. It was, the doctors had given her a clean bill of health, and she died. And that was, talk about a thunderbolt. I mean, that was like 20,000 thunderbolts coming all at once, to her and to her husband, who they sent her to school in the morning. And then that evening, she was in the hospital in the emergency room, on life support. So when when we look at that, it took her, I mean, obviously grief and all of these things, but what she did is she said, hey, what I've learned from this experience, and this is years later, it took her a while, is that, we have a gift of parenting. We're really good parents. And so she started to foster kids, and, she does adopted kids, and she's been like this beacon of role model, parent, all of these things, because she said the gift that was given to me was to continue to do this, whether it was with my biological child or with other children. I have this gift of love to give to children. Mm-hmm. And it's just amazing now to see, her kids now are in their teens. And it's just amazing to see what she did with that thunderbolt, is she found a purpose. It's kind of what you were saying. She found meaning in that terrible tragedy. Mm. And these kids benefited from that, right?
They sure did. Yeah, that's such a beautiful story. You do talk about that, your friend, in your book, of course. And I did want to further, I want to read a little something from your book that I think is really beautiful, Janet, and then ask you to kind of comment on it.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I like that you talk about this idea of, this inquiry process that you talk about is really about trying to become your whole version of yourself, becoming whole. And you say, by that, I mean awakening to the magnificence of your own existence, coming to terms with and embracing your individual journey and the legacy you have inherited from your unique upbringing and experiences, realizing that despite your uniqueness, you are not separate, understanding how you and other human beings are more the same than different, integrating the inner wisdom that connects you to everything, and creating the self that you are called to be to allow you to contribute and serve fully. That is so beautiful. I think most people listening to this or watching this are probably leaning and saying, yes, I want that for myself.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we're going back full circle to the time when, I was a kid with the lazy eye, right? Mm-hmm. And feeling so different and so alienated, and realizing that, wait a minute, we're all the same. We all feel that pain. I mean, how many of us have ever been made fun of or have had experiences where we just didn't fit in? And what is the pain that's associated with that? We all feel that. And I think what we do is we allow shame or we allow fear to cloud that connection that we have with others. Because really, on some level, it was fear because I look different. Because I look different, people started to become afraid of me. They would say, you're a freak. You're not like me. You're not normal.
Yeah.
And so, what I challenge in my book and in my work with people is, what is normal? There's beauty in each one of us. And so how do you come to terms with that magnificence of yourself and realize that there are shadow parts? We all have the potential for good, evil. Come to terms with all of that and realize that's all part of the human experience, but everyone else is just as magnificent as you are. And how do you connect with people on that level? With curiosity, with openness, with admiration, with just respect. I mean, I think that's another piece that's missing in our world today, is just respect. Respect your uniqueness that you bring forward, and that doesn't diminish mine. So it's not a competition. I mean, just like we're having this podcast right now, I can feel the light shining as we're talking, because you're in your magnificence. I'm bringing some magnificence forward, and we're bringing that together into one light, and it's shining together. So it's not, your title or my title. It's we're on the same journey. We're on the same mission. Mm-hmm. That makes sense, Alise, but
it's sister, I completely got what you threw down. I'm picking up what you're laying down. I got you. Yeah. And I think our listeners and viewers do too. So I want to give a challenge to our listeners and viewers. You are someone in an organization. Let's say, I don't care if you're a leader, individual contributor, or if you're the boss or whatever, but you have the ability to really ripple a positive effect into your organization. And if you are in charge of a division or an organization, your own individual growth is where the company can grow to. So if you're not continuing to grow as a leader, your organization is gonna stay just right where you're at as well. So imagine what could happen in your organization if you went and did what Janet and I are talking about here, where you went out to go help your team to find their own magnificence, to go and see what is it that makes them special, and really be deliciously intentional about celebrating that, bringing that up. What would happen in your organization if you started doing this kind of work first on yourself, and then you unleashed it in your organization? Oh my gosh, tell us what would happen. Wouldn't that be fun, Janet? We would love to get that challenge from you. Yes.
How many times do you hear, at least I hear this as a coach, I hear this all the time. It's like, I want to bring my whole self.
Yeah.
I want to bring my whole self.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're talking about is starting to look at people's whole selves. Or how many times are there people in your organization that could be you, because I know I've been there, where you feel like you're only contributing 5% of what you could contribute.
Totally have felt that way. Yes.
So much more potential because people aren't seeing you. They're not seeing that potential. They have you in this little job description in this little box. And it's like, okay, well, you do this and you're this, or this is what you contribute. And then people say, well, my talents aren't, quote, being utilized.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what if we could see people in the way that they're so much bigger and that they have so many other talents, but I don't think we're wired, or we feel like we don't have the time to see people that way. And I think part of seeing yourself and learning to go inside of yourself also helps you see the bigness of others.
Yes.
So much bigger than what we bring forward.
I love that, Janet. Yes. What if we went looking, ladies and gents, for the bigness in everyone on our team? And then we got out of the way and unleashed all of that beautiful passion and drive and their desire to contribute. What would happen? That's the kind of organizations that I'm out to create. I call them destination workplaces. I think, right? And so why am I an organizational psychologist, Janet? I'm not a clinical psychologist, because I believe in the wonder and power of work as a way of being in the world, as serving, and as helping us to realize our potential. Yeah. So right. And so I just am wanting our listeners and viewers to really recognize how much they can contribute to, one, this loneliness problem that we're all dealing with, two, helping people to realize their own magnificence, right, in their own companies and their own organizations. Yeah. And then three, really being clear about what happens if you, the leader, really started doing some of this work on yourself, where you're giving yourself this time to be reflective daily, weekly, to be able to listen for that whisper. And you started to recognize what is the right next place for you to put your foot on the lily pad, if you will. That's the kind of stuff that I really feel like, Janet, if we can start just to, 2%, 3%, that ripple effect is huge.
Drip, drip, drip. Yes, absolutely. And I think sometimes these things seem so magnificent or big. And so we're like, oh, what's the impact I'm going to have? What's the impact I'm going to have? And I always question people. I know I've had teachers have such a dramatic impact on me, or they changed the course of my life, or one conversation with someone had a huge impact on my life. So I think it's these moments where we're, every single moment we're having an impact on someone. And you never know what impact you're having if you're not more conscious of those moments. And so, the challenge I would give to people is really start to be more conscious about every interaction you have with people, and who are you being in that moment. So that's a thing that I always challenge myself, is who am I being right now as I'm having this conversation with someone.
That is a beautiful way for us to finish the show, Janet. You are a beautiful soul. I'm so happy to call you a sister and a friend, a comrade in, I don't want to say arms because that's got a negative connotation, but a comrade in the work that we're doing. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for writing your books, doing the work that you're doing, and being on Working on Purpose.
Oh, thank you. It's been my pleasure, and I'm honored to be on your show. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Listeners and viewers, you are going to want to follow this woman, learn more about her work and her books. The best way to do that is her website. It's janetioli.com. Let me spell that for you. Janet, Janet, Ioli, IOLI, janetioli.com. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can always catch it via recorded podcast. We were on air with Siobhan McHale talking about her work and helping people lead change, and her book, The Hive Mind at Work. Next week, we'll be on with Dr. Jordan Grummett talking about his book, The Purpose Code, How to Unlock Meaning, Maximize Happiness, and Leave a Lasting Legacy. He teaches us that we can all access purpose, and it doesn't have to be on a grand scale to be meaningful and fulfilling. See you there. And remember that work is one of the best adventures and means of realizing our potential and making the impact we crave. So let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Alise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.